Welcome to another episode of today's Conversations on Leadership, powered by Life University. I'm your host, Dr. Gilles LaMarche, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Mr. Peter Holt. Peter has been in the franchise business for over 3 decades. He came to the Joint Chiropractic 7 years ago, currently serving as president and CEO out of Arizona. Peter, thanks so much for taking time to be with us, and welcome to today's Conversations on Leadership.
It's absolutely my pleasure to be here. So thank you so much for inviting me and talking about one of my favorite topics.
And I know that leadership is one of your favorite topics. So if you could share with our audience your trajectory into leadership, knowing that you've been in the franchise world now for 3 decades, you've transitioned through multiple companies and now been at the Joint Chiropractic for 7 years. Please share with us your trajectory into leadership and maybe some of the best lessons that you've learned that you can convey to our audience that would allow them to become better leaders.
Sure. No, it's such a broad question there. And I think that what I would say about leadership is a lifelong journey. It's not that you read a book and suddenly become a leader, or that you have a mentor and then suddenly you become a leader. I think if you really think about it, we all are leaders in some form or fashion. We are leaders of our family. We're leaders of our community. We're leaders of our church. We're certainly leaders in our organization. And so certainly we think CEO is leader, but guess what? Every single person in this organization has a role. Many of them have direct reports, so they do have people they actually have some responsibility to help, to foster, to help them unleash their best potential in terms of helping the organization grow forward. So leadership is something that starts from the moment you start interacting with human beings. And so I think over time, you learn certain lessons in how to interact with people, motivate people, how to move people. How do you get people to understand your position, or how do you spend time understanding theirs? And so I think that this is, from my perspective, is something that we are, it starts with our parents, and quite frankly, the values that you are being instilled as a child. And that you will hold those for a period, and then you ultimately have to embrace them as your own. Your parents can't give you your values; they can teach you values, and then ultimately you have to embrace it as your own. And I think so. That to me is one of the first tenets of leadership: is understanding what is the value constructs that you are using to live your life. We all have values. That to me, like an organization has a set of values that find all. So we have 5 values here at the Joint that are essential for how we see ourselves. And if you really think about a set of values, what does that really mean? All it is a framework for decision making. The decisions that you make are governed by the values that you hold. And whether they're implicit or explicit, they absolutely are governing, do I do this or I do that? And here at the Joint, we actually have 5 values that we put on the wall and use that as a framework for our decision making. Now, they're aspirational. And that we fail from time to time, but they're an important construct that gives us that context of why we do what we do. And here at the Joint, we have 5 core values. It's trust, integrity, excellence, accountability, and respect. And there's a lot of reason. There's so many great values out there. And there's a lot of reasons why those specific values were chosen. And one of the things that I learned in my career of leadership, and I have a lot of different conversations that I have with franchising and with franchisees and franchisors. And what I would tell you is that one of the most important values that you can have as a leader is your capacity to listen. And one of the things—
You said the capacity to listen?
The capacity to listen.
Yeah, you broke up for a second. That's why I wanted to make sure that I heard you correctly.
Yes. So yeah, I want you to listen to me.
Yes.
So yes, I think one of the core values of a leader is that capacity to listen. Because if you don't have that capacity to listen, you can't get the information that you need to make the decisions that you're responsible for. So one of the sayings I have is that everybody is telling you everything that you need to know, and nobody's listening. And it's just true. Everybody's telling us everything we need to know, and nobody's listening because we're so anxious about our own story and wanting to get it out and how important it is to us. And it's almost as if you can't hear what that other person says until that you feel listened to. And so I would say that this is, to me, one of the important tenets of effective leadership is your capacity to listen to the people that you are working with.
So how did you develop that capacity? Was it a work in progress for you? Was it something that came to you naturally? Because I know with many people, they have a tendency to want to respond all the time. So you've obviously developed that capacity, or I would assume you developed the capacity. What process did you utilize to develop that capacity?
Sure. I think first of all that some people are more effective or have a more innate ability to listen than others. And so there's a certain innateness to the quality of listening, but without question, there is a learned skill of listening. And I think this is where some of the books that you can read that can really help you define that and understand that. There's really a wonderful book that came out a couple of years ago by Kate Murphy called Nobody's Listening, and what you're missing and why it's important. And I think it does just this really beautiful job about talking about how important listening is, the way we listen or we don't listen, and that what steps that we can take to be a better listener. So I think that one of the things I would say as a lifelong leader is it ties to a lifelong love of reading. I think reading is one of the most powerful tools we have to accelerate the growth of our own development. Because that you have only so many hours a day, you only have so many years to live, and that there's only so many things you can do in that space. So if we're just talking about the experiential things that you have, and that's how we're going to define your sense of self, then it's very limited. But it's through reading that you can be open to whole new worlds, whole new ideas, all kinds of things that never would have occurred to you that could be possible. And so I would encourage any leader or anybody that's interested in leadership is to read as widely and as much as you possibly can. It just opens up doors that you just can't have access to any other way.
Do you have a favorite book or two that you could recommend to our growing leaders?
Well, I'm a voracious reader, and I read a lot about the industry. I read a lot. I used to in college. I would read so much in high school. I mean, when I was a kid, I actually I was growing up in Idaho, and my mother would drop me off at the library at 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock whenever it opened on Saturday, and I would just sit there and go through the books and read. And so there's a whole range of diverse reading that I've been doing. I would say, kind of as a leadership book that I've read recently, and it's an interesting book. It's by Mark Mason, and the book is called "The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F." Now, it's a potty mouth book, so I'm I really don't like the language that they use in that book. But I just think as a laying out a philosophy of life and leadership and what's important and how you define what's important, I think there's some really interesting ideas to reflect on. So I would encourage. I definitely. It's a quick read.
So the title again, you said "The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F."
Not giving an F. It's so again, it's a potty mouth book, so I'm warning you that it's not language that I would use, and certainly not in anything that I'm writing. But it is. I think the message there is really interesting and thought provoking as we see how we see what's important to us. What's the definition of happiness? One of the comments that came out of it that I really appreciated was, again, we're talking back to values, is that to me one of the core values of all of life is trust. Is that nothing of value can be created without trust, and that it's really the thing that holds together all relationships. And whether it's in a marriage, whether it's in, again, your church, whether it's in a business relationship, this is the power of the franchise model. Is that it's very much like a marriage, that our franchisees are signing a 10-year agreement. So this isn't just a one-off moment. I sign this contract and then I'll never see you again. We're entering into a marriage, and franchising very often is treated or characterized as a marriage. And in fact, in some states, it's easier to get a divorce than it is to break a franchise agreement. And so it's in that relationship that you are bound together for that period, just like in a marriage. And one of the comments in this book that I found so fascinating is that to truly create trust, is that it requires conflict. Now, where most of us are conflict averse. We don't like to be in arguments. We don't like the fight. There are a few people that actually take relish, but the majority of us are conflict adverse, and there's reasons for that. But what's interesting to me in this concept in the book was talking about is that it's not in the avoidance of conflict. It's actually in the embracing of conflict that you actually have the opportunity to build trust or break trust. And so it's in that moment where you are in that conflict. And so if you have a common shared framework of values that allows you to listen to that person, even when you don't agree, listening is not agreeing. It creates that space where you can have that real dialogue and actually learn from the people around you to determine, okay, what is the best thing to do? And so if you think about it, how did I build trust in my marriage? Well, it's in those moments of conflict, and then how you respond to that adds to the bank of trust or can break that thing. And that's just one of to me, the really interesting concepts that came out of that book that I think is so valuable. When we come back to franchising, I have so many different ways to talk about franchising, and franchising is the business of forced listening. It is the most unique relationship that you will ever have in business. Our franchisees, they're not my employees. They're not a union. That there are like-minded people who are putting a significant portion of their life savings on the line to build your business or your brand. And it creates this really unique relationship that forces you to listen to what they have to say. Again, one of those challenges is how do we listen to the people? And if I can tell you right now, if you don't respect the people, you will not listen to a single thing they have to say. Nobody listens to whom we don't respect. And that's why, again, in that franchise relationship or in a marriage, it's okay to have the conflict. My wife and I, we will be celebrating our 40th anniversary next month.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
And I would tell you in that nearly 40 years, we've argued about everything, absolutely everything. And when we can take that step back and we look, okay, what's happening is we are most often trying to get to the same point from two very different perspectives. And when we can take that pause and look back and listen to each other, like, oh, okay, now I'm understanding where we're trying to go. But it's the one thing that we have never argued about in those 40 years is our shared values. And that's absolutely what holds us together as a marriage. That's what holds a franchise system together. That's what holds a church together. That's what holds a university together.
I'll tell you, the art of listening, we start off talking about the art of listening. One day somebody said to me, listening is so important. That's why God gave you 2 ears and only one mouth. Exactly. And so I intentionally started attending meetings, going to organizational meetings and saying, I'm going to listen at least twice more than I'm actually talking. So even if I've got an idea, I started just paying attention to listening to everybody in the room before I actually spoke. And the only time I would speak out first or second was when nobody was speaking. I'd say, okay, well, until you get yourself ready to share your experience, I'd like to ask one extra question, or here's one thought, and then just start getting quiet. Yeah. And it is a profound lesson. So for those of you listening in who know that you have not yet been great active listeners, maybe remember that. You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen at least twice as much as you speak. And when you go into any conversation and you go into it intentionally, really, really wanting to listen so that the person you're speaking with or the people you're speaking with recognize that you're listening because you actually care about them, right? You actually care about what they think. So we listen with the goal of having them feel that we care about them. It completely changes the conversation. It completely changes organizations. That's been my experience. Has that been a similar experience to you, Peter?
Absolutely correct. And another way that I would talk about that, because again, we're back to this concept of conflict. It's essential. It's life-giving. It's how we grow. It's how we become different. It's how we improve. And so without conflict, you're stuck in who you are. And so this isn't something to avoid. This is something to embrace, but you will not embrace it if you don't have that trust in that person or believe what they're going to say. And so the corollary to this whole conversation about trust and listening is that you will Once you put somebody on the defense, then all listening stops. So it doesn't matter how powerful your idea is, it doesn't matter how correct your position is, that by putting that person on the defense, now they've stopped listening to any of your ideas other than to defend the position that they're already in. And so if you're truly trying to understand, if you're trying to pull out the collective wisdom of the group, and so often in leadership, that is your job as a leader, is not simply to provide all of the information and then let your team execute to it. It's your responsibility. That's why you have a team of leaders around you and who they're leading below them. Is your responsibility is to pull out the strength of that group, because no matter how smart you are, you'll never be as smart as the collective wisdom of that group.
There's another piece of wisdom right there.
And so it's your capacity to pull that out, which is going to help you make better decisions. And in the end of the day, one of the core tenets of leadership is decision making. Do I do this? Do I do that? Okay, so the values that determine that, and this is around me, and then trying to make the right decision. And so you have to be able to tap into the resources and that collective wisdom of the people around you in order to be able to move beyond your own experience.
Well, our time together has been extremely valuable, and I thank you for that. Any closing comments for audience?
Well, I would say that this is a lifelong journey, as I said from the beginning of this. We all are leaders. This is not something that you have to have a CEO title in order to be a leader in your life. You're influencing every single life that you touch. I think doctors of chiropractic understand that in a way that so many other professions don't. And that's such an important role that you play in your community with your business, with your clinic, and that your capacity to touch that into those clear tools of leadership allow you to be more effective in your personal life, in your professional life, and all the people that you touch.
Well, once again, you've shared some great nuggets, a lot of wisdom in this very, very short period of time. And I'm grateful that you've taken the time to be with us. And I'm sure that our audience that will be listening to this podcast will also be grateful that you took time out of your busy schedule to share your knowledge based on 30 plus years of experience in leadership roles. So thank you, Peter. And until we see each other again.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. It was absolutely my pleasure to be here.
Thank you.